most people realize that, the word Aliyah, it doesn't just mean moving. Right? They're going up. They're coming for some bigger purpose, and they know that's going to come with changes. And people know themselves, like, how much change can they handle? It's definitely it's something different, and that's why people are willing to come, even though it will probably cost a lot of sacrifice. But it's worth it. This is home.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Stark Tank, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, we sit down with Yaakov Ehrenkranz, a financial advisor living in Ramot Beit Shemesh. This episode is a little bit different. The first half will sound more familiar. We trace Yaakov's life journey from his childhood in Memphis through his time in KBY, his professional journey, and the Ian morning seder he learns daily. But the second half of this conversation, we do a deep dive on a few topics related to money. Yaakov spent significant time helping families with their Aliyah journey, and I want him to share some of the lessons that he has learned about money, Aliyah, happiness, and shalom bayis. Before we begin, a quick reminder to head over to starktank.org and subscribe to receive exclusive Stark Tank articles directly to your inbox. This week, a Stark Tank listener will be sharing his own Aliyah financial journey, so make sure to go to starktank.org and subscribe so you don't miss it. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Stark Tank. Yaakov Ehrenkranz, welcome to Stark Tank. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
So I think you're the first Stark Tank guest who hails from Memphis, Tennessee. So maybe you could start with a little bit of a background about yourself, your childhood, and what life was like growing up down there.
Yeah, sure. So I did, as you said, I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. I was there basically until I went to yeshiva, which we could talk about later. Memphis, it's out of town, very, say, slower paced than maybe some of in town, a relaxed place. But thank God had a fair amount of Jewish infrastructure, nice day school, high school. Not a lot of the extras or restaurants that really lasted a long time. But it was a nice place to grow up, and, it's known for things like Southern hospitality. Learned a lot about how to really be machnas orchim nicely. My parents and the community in general. So, so that it's a real thing. Other places should learn from it. Some have, and hopefully more will. But yeah, it's a nice place, and that's where I spent along with my 7 siblings. That's where we grew up, and it's a nice place. If you can't be in Israel, you could check it out. It even has more Jewish infrastructure, I think, now than it did then. And Baruch Hashem, a nice place to live. A little hot though.
Right. Well, Beit Shemesh is also hot, so we'll get to your Aliyah in just a second. But let's just talk about your transition out of Memphis to Kerem B'Yavneh, to Yeshiva. So how did you decide to go to Kerem B'Yavneh, and how did your time there shape who you are as a person, as a Ben Torah?
Yeah, KBY was it's kind of funny how I got there. They had in Memphis there was a family on Shlichut. I don't know if you know Rabbi Ari Katz. Maybe you know him. Now many people know him from his work in Sderot. So he was someone who was teaching, and he was a rebbe of mine in high school. And we were my whole family. We were all very close with him. When I grew up there, my grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins, many of them lived there too. And he was from Kerem B'Yavneh, and he went back to Kerem B'Yavneh. So it was just kind of a place I looked. I didn't even know exactly how serious or intense it was going to be, but he was probably a very major part of the reason I went there, and it ended up being a very good decision. I ended up staying there for almost 3 years. I know that's not quite as long as some other people stay there. I know you outdid me there, but it was a very good and formative time, and really set a lot of foundations and relationships, both with Rebbeim and friends. And it's very different from Memphis. I do remember that when getting there, the Rebbeim would ask me if I knew there's 2 famous Rabbanim in Memphis, Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt or Nutta Greenblatt, and everyone would ask me. And to me, they were just, 2 rabbis in the community, like normal people. And it was only then I think I realized that they were a really big deal outside of Memphis. But anyway, it's good. It was good to develop a lot of friendships that I still have today from there with both Rebbeim and friends.
Right. And then I guess one of the things that maybe we don't talk about in this podcast enough, maybe we should. Obviously, there's the great experience in the moment of learning and connecting and growing, and that's wonderful. But then there's the sort of longer term effects of how it shaped you, and how those few years really set you on a certain path for life. So can you maybe reflect on how that has had a long term effect on you?
Sure. I mean, one thing and you know this from the Rebbeim there. Of course, I was more in the American program as you were in the whole yeshiva, but the Rebbeim definitely try to very much instill in their students a lot of things, but definitely in terms of the importance of learning and learning very seriously on a high level for life. And, in high school, we had good learning. We had great rebbeim. We had, I think it was a high level for high school, especially out of town. But there's where it really picked up, along with the understanding that there's really I don't know the right way to say it, an obligation, a responsibility to learn and possibly even to teach and share what you learn, with others, with students, with children, with your own children. So, it definitely was a very formative time. It took some time to get used to being there on an intense schedule, but by my third year, and it was definitely very formative for later, both in terms of the knowledge you build, the skills in learning, and just the commitment that the Rebbeim display, and the other students also. And there's, as you were part of a very large kollel of people who stay there learning and very committed. And I think it has, to this day, thank God, I went on to learn in other yeshivas as well. But those years and things I learned there and skills have, I think, stayed with me through today, hopefully for longer.
Right. So that's a great segue to the next question, which is, so then, right, you have this sort of vision set out for you for not just a way of life while you're in yeshiva, but a vision for beyond yeshiva. So what was your next step after that? How were you trying to pivot out, but to keep those values as you got older and set your sights, to starting a family and all that stuff? So what were the next steps for you, and how did those values sort of guide you in that stage?
So the next step, I did go to YU afterwards. I did have some back and forth deciding. A bunch of friends at that time were going to other yeshivas. Some went to Ner Yisrael, which obviously, it's a little different than YU, and it has less. Your college classes maybe are pushed off longer and take less of your time for those that do it. Bichlal. But I ultimately decided to go to YU, where I thought I could learn and also I don't know if I knew exactly what career path I'd take then, but I thought get an education which would be helpful. I ended up only staying in YU for 1 year. I didn't leave totally, but I came back. I ended up coming back to Israel for another year to the Mir Yeshiva at that point, and I just wanted to take another year, kind of without having to deal with the rest of life and just learn and push off college a little more. That was another opportunity to be more engrossed in learning, which was a great year in the Mir. Had to learn a little Yiddish and heard shiurim from Rosh Arieli's. At that time, perhaps the biggest shiur in the world. Maybe by now others have surpassed it. But that was an important year. Ended up getting married not long after that year. So he stayed in Israel for another year, and then eventually came back to YU, where I finished college while my wife was in dental school and did smicha there also. And the whole time trying to balance all of these things. I had to work for some of the time when I was in YU. Sometimes I was teaching a little bit there. Sometimes I worked as a mashgiach in a nursing home. But the idea was to keep learning as much as I could, which thank God I was able to. Didn't have that many other responsibilities. Was able to do that. Finish college, finish smicha, and get a few more years in Israel. So overall, yeah, it was good. Good times.
So you mentioned sort of in passing that you got smicha and that you were doing some teaching on the side. So were those just sort of like practical things to be able to learn a little more and get a little side income? Or was there something even back then that said, I'm considering having some sort of rabbinic identity, educational identity that will go along with my career, which we'll get into in a second?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's some combination. I don't think growing up I really ever dreamed of teaching or rabbanos or anything like that. In YU, there is a little bit of I don't know how the right way to describe it, but within there's a big smicha program, and it's I think well respected. And within the base medrash, a lot of the serious guys do consider going into careers of teaching Torah or becoming rabbanim or various other types of jobs with their smicha. So definitely thought about it some, and obviously, teaching Torah is inherently valuable and important. So I think it was both. I mean, I certainly also needed to make some money at that time, and if we could do it in a way that's more inherently, satisfying and meaningful, so it's a combination. I don't think I was really leaning in that direction, and I still never really ended up taking full time or serious work in teaching Rabbanis. But at that time, it was a good way. I was blessed. I was able to work out to do that right there in a productive way, and it helped me get by.
Got it. And so as far as your career, you mentioned that you started in YU without a really clear picture. So how did that end up crystallizing, and how do you end up from being a first year student without any real picture to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a good question. Also, I think I started for a few weeks as a math major just because I like math, but the type of math I liked, you have to do a lot more math to have a math degree in college, and it was going to take a lot of work. I'm not sure if that was short-sighted decision or not, but I ended up shifting to economics, which I also liked. Then after I decided that math was maybe going to take a little too much time and I wanted to be learning more and I wasn't sure what I would do with a math degree. So deciding between finance and economics, which I had always had some interest in. I'd learned about the stock market when I was much younger. My grandmother used to teach me about the stock market back when you had to just look at a newspaper to see what was going on, with individual stocks or the markets. Um, so I ended up choosing economics. The head of the department at NYU was Rabbi Levine. Who's a very big Talmid Chacham and also very well respected expert in economics. I took many classes with him. I viewed that as an opportunity, and that's what I figured. Assuming I would end up doing something in the world of finance or investing, so it fit my interests, it fit my needs. There was good people to learn from, and that's ultimately what happened when I eventually finished college after a little detour back to the mirror and eventually finish.
And it's a very interesting description of the department head, Rabbi Levine. You said his name.
Yes, Rabbi Dr. Aaron Levine's.
Can you tell us a little bit more about him and how he sort of viewed his role as a Talmid Chacham and a professor and a leader in the field of economics? How he viewed his life in that regard.
Yeah, sure. He has, I mean, very prolific writer, has written a lot of articles and books. A lot of his work had to do with, I would say, kind of synthesizing modern economics and Torah, and he would show how Chazal understood economics and big picture and within the business world and business halacha. His books on business halacha, and he was also, again, I think he at one point debated Milton Friedman. He was a very very well respected economist also, and a very well respected Talmid Chacham. Believe he's cousins with Rav Shechter Shlita. I think Rav Shechter used to send him Choshen Mishpat Shilas. And if you read any of his books, you could see he's like a, really, really tremendous expert in both his breadth and depth of knowledge and Choshen Mishpat and many other areas of halacha and how they interact kind of with economics and economic theory. So it's just something that interested me. I mean, he held students to pretty high bar. You had to take things seriously and expected you to learn a lot, both in economics and especially in his classes on either business ethics or various parts of Jewish law and economics. So yeah, he was an important person. Unfortunately, he passed away while I was actually in the middle of an independent study with him. But yeah, I was, thank God, able to learn a lot from him.
Got it. Just parenthetically, like you were like in middle of a course, or like you were like talking to him, like.
No, it's the middle of a court. I think he died over Pesach that year. He was like the professor who I was working with on this on some class that I needed for my major, which he was willing to. I tried to arrange my schedule in college that I wouldn't get I was able to learn more, and I guess I was a little lazy on the college side. I didn't have to do too much. Independent study is always a fun thing because then you don't always have to be in class at the same time. And he was willing to do it, and he was sick. I don't think I realized at the time how sick he was. And then I think over Pesach that semester, an email went out that unfortunately he passed away.
Got it. Okay, so the world of financial planning that you're in now, how did you discover that world? What attracted you to it, and sort of what's your day-to-day like being a financial planner?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I finished smicha, we moved to Fair Lawn, New Jersey, and Rabbi Yudin had in his community had brought a bunch of families to have like a night kollel, and I was actually able to teach a little more in the morning. He had a lot of retired balabatim that learned there. In the afternoon, it was like kind of my first time out of full time learning, so I was able to still teach a little in the morning, learn at night, and then I started developing a certain strategy that had to do with investing, and I had a few like kind of friends and family accounts that were interested or willing to kind of try something that I was doing to do with options on futures. We could get into details. I'm not sure that'll interest that many people. So that's what I started with, and thank God that lasted for a couple of years. He turned it into a small fund. I was a licensed, it's called a commodities trading advisor, a CTA. And I did that we lived in Fairlawn for 2 years and we came to Israel. And I kept doing that while I was here, kind of learning the system on my own, just for myself, understanding the different aspects of the Israeli kind of financial system, not on a professional level like the, banking and finance, but more just understanding it and realizing a lot of people really didn't understand it. There's things that are different here. banking is different here, pensions work differently here, taxes work differently here. So I try to learn more and more about it. Now there's a lot of good resources of this stuff online. A lot of it's been developed since we got here. But at some point I started talking to, it was a local financial firm, Levinsky Financial, this is called. Actually, someone in my wife's family had married someone in that family, and I got to know the head of that firm. And eventually, I started to work for him. So I was still doing this commodities trading advising business that I was working for him part time, and that business involved some investment management as well as financial consulting. So, and there also, I learned quite a bit more about some of the details of the financial system, and then I was able to do consulting for clients that would come there, who mostly for Olim, for people who were in the process or had already moved here, Anglos, usually Americans living in Israel that, live in two currencies and two tax jurisdictions and two investment landscapes. And I, worked there for a few years and I liked it. It was nice being able to help people, hopefully with good things, sometimes to get out of tough situations or to plan for the future, and did that. And then stayed there for a few years and eventually, not that long ago, went out on my own.
Right. So it's very interesting because before you were talking about your experience learning Torah at a very high level and also economics, taking the studies very seriously, and then also teaching, giving over content, giving over values. And so now I hear that you sort of discovered this ability to be able to grasp a complex system, the whole Israeli financial ecosystem, and then be able to explain it to a layperson and help guide them along that path. So it's interesting how that sort of follows a bit of the similar framework that you were describing before. Is that something that you were thinking about and you were able to sort of understand that you had a koch to do these types of things?
And I think, I know there's a well-known financial guru named Dave Ramsey. He always says that you should have a financial advisor who has the heart of a teacher. I mean, it needs someone who could explain concepts in relatively, simplified ways, even to intelligent people, just so that things will make sense. So I think, there is that common denominator. I do think I try to help clients of mine understand the basics of money in general, of investing in finance, personal finance in general, and then specifically applying it to their situation when it gets a little more complicated when they live in a new country. So that was something, and like you said, I was able to keep when I moved here, I kept teaching a little bit also. Originally, I was just working kind of American hours, and I was living right near Yeshiva Leva Torah, which was a very nice yeshiva that also gave me opportunity to teach a little more there, and sometimes substituting for teachers that would go out recruiting in America, or sometimes learning with some of the boys there, some of the students. So yeah, I think there is a certain common denominator. Obviously, talking about just money, talking about Torah are very different experiences, but there is certainly that common denominator.
And there's a trend that I've started to see a little more. You talked about the fact that you were able to be a resource, and there are other financial advisors and wonderful people who have created clear and easy explanations around different complex topics, pensions and banking and all these things. But something that I've started to notice is that a lot of the you know, on the other side of the table, the government ministries, the banks themselves have realized that we're in a generation where people need clear and succinct and relevant information. So whether it's the banking apps that make things very clear and simple with little explanations, or government websites like Kolshoot, which I believe has a lot of English resources as well. So I mean, it's a wonderful thing. And then, so how do you see things playing out as far as the role of people like you being the translators and transmitters of this information, this knowledge, versus the governments and the banks themselves coming forward with a lot better and more accessible resources?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've thought about that a lot. In general, technology has enabled people to learn and do so much on their own. And I've thought about, is there really a future for investment advisors, financial planning? So the truth is, yeah, there's a lot that people could do on their own. And a lot of people who do what I do now also harness technology in a way to kind of create content that people could learn from without having, it's much more scalable that way as opposed to doing it one on one. But at the end of the day, they're just, for now at least, there still seem to be a lot of people who want a person there. Maybe more and more of the younger generation will do it more on their own and just find their own resources. And with the help of everything that's on the internet and AI and the way, like you said, the banks and governments themselves are helping people. So maybe more and more people will do it on their own, which is fine. I tell people I'm not looking to sell a product to someone who doesn't need it. I tell people that they need an investment advisor I mean, I do two things. I do just consulting and then investment advisory, which is more of an ongoing relationship. I tell people that, you don't, if you could do it on your own, do it on your own, like save the money. But if you aren't going to do it on your own, or if you're going to be scared and you're not going to be able to sleep at night because, you don't have someone to talk to about it or keep you from making, poor decisions, or there's other things beyond just the investing, you need someone to help you with a kind of side topics related to finance. That's what they pay me for. So for now, it's still there. I do think you're right that as time goes on, technology will make it so that people more and more and more will do more on their own, which is fine. I just got to get to retirement, then it'll be fine.
So I do want to go a little bit deeper into one more part of your career journey, which you just made reference to earlier, which is the fact that you went from being an employee in the Levinsky firm, which is a wonderful, wonderful place, to being independent. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about why you made that decision and how it's sort of been played out, how it's affected your life for better and worse.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's always a tough decision. If you work for someone, you typically have some stability, salary. It's not all on you to produce everything, and depending on how things are structured. But being on your own really gives you a lot of freedom to do what you want, when you want it, how you want it. But it also comes with a lot of responsibility that you have to produce. If you don't, if you don't produce, no one giving you a check. So, it was a good job, and it was fairly flexible. But at the end of the day, I just kind of wanted to, I don't want to say control my own destiny. I guess that's still at the end of the day, up to Hashem. But, some of it's financial. I want the upside to be mine. Whatever I do, if it works well, it's all mine. Whatever if I don't do well, it's my problem. So I'd gotten to a point where I was, I could afford to take the risk at least, and try it. And thank God, so far it's been great, and it allows me to keep. Again, it was flexible where I was, but now I certainly could keep the schedule I want. And even though I still have, I don't have anyone that works for me. I still have to. I try to use technology to make things efficient, but I definitely still have to take care of a lot of things that maybe in other offices a secretary or someone would do, and that's part of the beginning stages of being on your own, at least. But for me, it's been great, and thank God so far it's worked out nicely. Clients have come all basically word of mouth, and it's been good. It does help you work on your bitachon a little bit. You gotta know that it's you see out Hashem a lot in these things when you don't know where clients are going to come from or where income's going to come from. But so far, bli einhar worked out.
And as far as you said, like the ultimate control, not only of your sort of outcomes and product, but also your schedule. So tell a little bit more about how you're able to schedule your day that in a way that aligns with what you want to be doing and when.
Sure. So when we got here, I really was working like primarily in the afternoon. When we only had two children then, it was a little easier. In terms of when I had to be available at home. But now, those few years I was working a much more normal Israeli schedule, than occasional, American hours, and now I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm able to learn in the morning, do a program daf a week. I've had a chavrusa doing this for several years now. That we learn one daf every week, and basically until 11, ideally from 9 to 11. I can't promise you we always start exactly on time, but that's we have some type of morning seder where we could learn fairly seriously, Gemara with Rishonim, one daf every single week. We try to incorporate, also reviewing some old stuff we've done, and then at around 11, start to work. I don't work straight from 11 till the end of the day. Some days I could exercise, I could work out. Some days my wife works late, and I parent a little bit, and then, that's, thank God, been good. I try not to work too late at night, try to be available at home, and try to have a night seder at night also, have an arrangement with someone else in the community. We know that night seder does not always work. If someone who's able to learn in the morning, night seder, we kind of view it as extra credit. But if we're both available, try to go back to shul at night and learn a little bit then also. So, been very blessed to have a schedule that could accommodate both my work, which for now has been able to be contained at least in regular working hours, starting a little late, but a normal day, and as well as some learning.
Okay, and you live in Ramot Beit Shemesh, which is a wonderful place, but also every day a bigger and bigger and bigger place with a lot of subsections and communities. So I don't think we've had a guest yet from your community in what's called Memphis, although we did do a wonderful event, and thank you for your help in arranging the wonderful Shir Torski, which many people have benefited both in person and the recordings, and we can link to that as well. So that was very, very special to connect with the Shark Tank in Memphis. But maybe for listeners who are considering different communities in different areas, tell us a little bit about what that's like and why you chose it.
That's a good question also. Yeah, there are a lot of different neighborhoods in Ramot Beit Shemesh. It's a lot of them have certain things in common. As you know, a lot of Americans throughout Beit Shemesh and in Mem Shalosh as well. It is pretty diversified neighborhood, I would say. There is a Talmud Torah, like a cheder in the middle of the neighborhood, a regular Haredi cheder that has, there's many families here that send their children to there. And there's also, as you had hosted the event at Rabbi Gottlieb Shul, which is kind of like a more regular Dati Leumi Torani, but Dati Leumi shul neighborhood. They have another shul that's moved down recently. It's called Shari Tefillah. It used to be up the hill. It's really quite a big mix here. There are other neighborhoods that I'd say maybe a little younger, maybe people with mostly younger kids. Here we have a lot of young kids, thank God, a lot of teenagers also, and slightly older families. It's Beit Shemesh. It's hot. It's it's right near parks and stuff. I don't know what else is super helpful about it, but it's to share. But it's a nice neighborhood. It's way too expensive, which is the connection between where I live and what I do. Just trying to help people being able to move here and buy houses, especially the way houses and mortgages are done in Israel. It on the one hand, it's maybe good for me that we own a home here, and I'm sure it's worth a lot of money now. But it doesn't help me if I'm not going anywhere. But it is expensive. It's part of what I work with people to try to be able to afford it. It would be nice if there were ways to keep prices kind of more stable, but I don't know. It hasn't worked yet. But it's a nice neighborhood.
That's a great segue to our next topic, but I just wanted to sort of zone in on one thing, which is what specifically drove you there? Was it the fact that Rabbi Gali was starting the show, or was the building project that attracted you? What exactly brought you there?
Honestly, we were looking at that point for a house. We gave up on the market coming down, and we finally just decided that even though for as much as this cost, we could have bought a whole block in Memphis. We found something, and yeah, we knew people who moved to Rabbi Gottlieb's community. We're not like directly on that development, but we're very close by, and they're actually building a new shul even closer to our house than to their original neighborhood. That was definitely part of it. There are people I knew from where we used to live in Ramat Shilo, and who I knew from either from KBY or from YU, and Rabbi Gottlieb, of course, himself is great. It was definitely part of it, but it was a nice diversified community with the house that fit our needs. I would say we could have ended up somewhere else in Ramat Beit Shemesh also, but we're glad we're here, and it's very nice.
Got it. Okay, so the next part of this conversation, we're going to shift gears a little bit and sort of pick your brain as a professional, specifically a financial professional, someone who spent a lot of time speaking to families, planning, executing, and living in Israel, making Aliyah from America, from other places. So there's a few topics within that we're going to talk about. And I guess I want to start with the following. I think, you and I both, you made Aliyah on your own. I was zocha to come with my parents. Many people have made Aliyah. Many people have been successful here. Many Israelis who were born here, they live, they're not destitute, they're not on the streets, they're very happy. So, you know, are there any, what are the real I would say, like, why not? Like, are there any real financial reasons, right? We're not talking to you as an educator, which you also are, and a parent, which you also are. But from a financial perspective, are there any real reasons why a person should be saying, Aliyah is not for me from your angle?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'd like everyone to see if it's possible, but it's a little bit like moving anywhere else. If you can't afford it, you can't afford it, and there are people here that can't afford it. I deal with people and I see people's lifestyles and spending habits, and there's really a ginormous range of what people spend. A lot of Americans that come here, they really make sacrifices and change their lifestyle, or some of them make enough money they could keep their lifestyle, but it can be very expensive. But there are people, especially I've met with people coming from out of town. Let's say even if they own a home, their home there is just not worth anywhere near what it would cost to buy a home in places like Ramot Beit Shemesh. Now, depending on what their family situation is, it could be, you may know this better than I do, but there are places outside of kind of the major popular Anglo destinations. If you're not looking at, Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim, Modi'in, Ra'anana, Beit Shemesh, that'll be cheaper. But I don't know that that's for everyone. A lot of people like coming to these places like Beit Shemesh and some other Anglo-heavy cities, because it's a softer landing, an easier transition. The schools are, maybe a little more similar to what they're used to, and at least speak their language. And these places are expensive, and even people with really good jobs sometimes have a hard time, being able to afford a house or cars are very expensive here. So it really does depend on what you come with and what your earning power is here. Like you said, there are plenty. The national average salaries here is very low, 12, 13,000 shekel. Talking about less than $50,000 a year, which, in America, if you read various studies or listen to, podcasts talking about what it costs to be Jewish in America with tuitions and things, it's, much, much, much higher than that. So there are certain things that are less expensive here, like tuition and maybe healthcare. And there are certain things that are much, much more expensive. And it really depends, if a person is flexible and has the ability to pivot to a career that makes more money here and to pivot their lifestyle to really, really scale back. There are people that come and don't have a car. People come and move into much, much, much smaller homes. People who are willing to accept that they may not own a home for a long time. There's certain government programs that will try to help people, have easier entry into a first home. But some people might come and say they're just going to rent, and the rent is cheaper than buying. It's something I meet with people a lot about is, can I afford to make Aliyah? We try to like really understand what their lifestyle is, how that could be adapted in Israel, and what their expected incomes or assets would allow them to live like here. There are cases where we'll say like, wow, this would take a ton of sacrifice, a ton. Or, so again, there's places like that all over the world. In America, not everyone could afford to live everywhere either. So I'd like to be able to try to help everyone do it or figure out how to do it, but I can't say it's always possible. And I could say it usually will require, some sacrifice or some changes to one's lifestyle, even if it's just one car instead of two, or an attached house instead of a standalone house. Like, these things are different for some people, and it's impressive that people are willing to come different stages in life and make these sacrifices. But I can't say everyone could do it. That would be, I think, a little bit of a jump.
Right. It's very interesting. I mean, you said that it really all surrounds, a 4-word question. Can I afford it? And I think the word within that sentence that strikes me the most is, it. What is the it that we're trying to afford? And you made reference to this in the beginning. Is the question of Aliyah a question of being able to move across the country to a totally different type of society, financial system, economy, and to live the same life that I was living in a totally different country? As you said, this is a question that anyone who moves from any city to another city. So within America, there's some things that are common, but some things that are very different in the prices and in the markets and in the commute and in the transportation systems and all these different things. So, when I have these conversations with people, and I'm not qualified to have them, but people who reach out to me from the podcast and wanted to talk about Aliyah. So really the question comes down to, do you want to move to a different country but continue the exact same lifestyle? I don't think that's a very fair or realistic question to ask. So, like, is that what you see also in your conversations?
And you're right. You know, I don't. I think you're right. Most people realize that the word aliyah, it doesn't just mean moving. Right? They're going up. They're coming for some bigger purpose, and they know that's going to come with changes. And people know themselves, like, how much change can they handle, or how much do they think they can handle? They try to figure out. I would say most people realize that they're not really just. It's not just the same as moving from Memphis to Cincinnati or from Teaneck to Fairlawn. It's definitely, it's something different, and that's why people are willing to come, even though it will probably cost a lot of sacrifice, but it's worth it. It is something more than that. This is home. This is where we think, we believe the future of the Jewish people is going to be, and those who want to be here on the playing field instead of in the stands. So they come, even if it means, not having the exact same condition. So you're right. It's not just like any other move. I didn't mean to compare it complete to that. But at the same time, we also have to work out the numbers, because at the end of the day, you need a roof over your head. You got to buy food. You got to, have a way to get around, a job and things like that. And depending on one's skill sets and resources, it could take different levels of sacrifice.
Right. And then this sort of leads to a topic which is very much connected to the Aliyah question, but also to other people, whether they're already in Israel or they're staying in America for whatever reason, which is that I think the natural inclination or expectation is that we're always going to be sort of going up. And if I have now a small house, then the next house will be a bigger house. If I now have one car, the next step will be two cars. And, sometimes in life, we have to take the opposite trajectory and, tighten the belt a little bit, downsize. So have you seen people make that shift successfully? What allows them to do it? Because I understand, like, it makes sense. You're used to something, so you want to, at the very least, retain what you had, and if not, just be going up. It's sort of a natural thing that we all want and yearn for, but it's not always necessarily practical, whether it's talking about Aliyah or beyond that. So have you seen people successfully sort of downshift in order to be able to really live, a proper life?
Yeah, I mean, well, proper, it's hard to define it exactly, but it's definitely seen people do it. I see people do it all the time. I would say many people that move here, especially once they own a home in America, which is likely to be, depending on where they live, but very likely to be a standalone home, a front yard, a backyard, two cars. And most people that come here are not getting that, not in Beit Shemesh and not in Yerushalayim. I mean, again, there are people that have it, but those, I think they're the minority. So people do it. How to define is it successful? They stay. I don't think they stay because they feel they're stuck. They stay because they're happy that they're happy to be a part of everything that's going on here. They're happy with the way their children are growing up. They're happy that there is less of that focus on maybe, I would say maybe Gashmias in general. It's not that Beit Shemesh is lacking Gashmias necessarily, but it's I think it is a little bit at least less of a focus, and I think people do stay. And I think if you took a survey, people would consider it a success, and even many of the ones who we're talking about who have had to make real sacrifices, whether it's actual downgrading from what they were to where they are, or just what they could have been if they had gone and lived somewhere else, to where they could maybe make more money, pay less tax, buy bigger homes, buy fancier cars. And I don't think they live every day thinking, oh shoot, why don't I have a ginormous house or an extra car? They're happy. That's the reality here. um, have again, I can't say every story is perfect. There are people that move back. There are people that truly struggle here. There are people that don't end up being able to buy a home. But at the end of the day, to answer your question, yeah, there are people who come live less. I would say with less of the creature comforts or less of the just material niceties that they might have had somewhere else, and they still view it as a great decision that they're going to stick with. So I think that is a success.
And another sort of aspect that is very much touches on this, but is a little bit different, around 15, 20 years ago, the book Startup Nation came out and highlighted how Israel has become this tech powerhouse. And it sort of broke down a couple of the reasons. And one of the things, I don't know if this is exactly the way they talk about it there, but certainly I think anyone who's in Israel realizes that there's a sort of like can do attitude when your back's up against the wall and you sort of, you have to make things work, that allows Israelis to really thrive under adverse circumstances, whether it's war or other challenges that this country and this nation face. So, to what extent do you think that is important in the Aliyah decision? Me myself, I'm also guilty of the sort of American mindset of like needing things to be worked out to the umpth degree in order to make a decision versus like going with the flow a little more and let's try to make this happen, make it work, even if we don't have a clear cut plan and path and everything all worked out.
It's a little bit of a tough question. I mean, you certainly were, I think, a resilient people and resilient country. We've seen this past few weeks, past few years, kind of the situation we find ourselves living in with everything going on. Unfortunately, including a lot of loss and a lot of time in mamads and safe rooms and things like that. People do come and I think build more and more of that resilience. These are not things that kids growing up in America, typically have to deal with. Certainly not up close and not on a on an ongoing basis like we have here over the past few years. How that plays out, people's financial lives, as a in my professional capacity, I'm still a proponent of planning and trying to do your proper, not, here there's a term like living in minus. Like there are people who often, it's like the banks offer it as a standard feature, like it's expected. You just may have to not have enough in your account to cover this month. And for some people, it's reality. And for some people, it's maybe they're not living within their means. I don't know. So I wouldn't say, take all of that resilience and going with the flow and turn it into a helter skelter financial plan and just kind of see what comes. Although maybe some people think that's a level of be tough one that makes sense. I don't know. And in my capacity, I'm usually trying to help people establish reserves and a plan going forward. but at the same time, appreciating the kind of resilience you're mentioning, and that we also do try to fight through when things are tough, and make the most of it, but pick ourselves up and shake it off and move on. But I don't know, that's I don't know. Hope that answers it.
Right. And then one of the things that I've noticed and I've always found very interesting is the fact that, on the one hand, Israel is not nearly as much of a wealthy country as the United States. So that's just a fact of reality. On the other hand, if you look at all the happiness rankings, Israel is consistently near the top of the world, way farther than the USA. So I tell people, not sarcastically, just very seriously, like, it's a poorer country and a happier country. So, like, which one do you want as far as the Aliyah decision? So how do you think about those data points, and then also sort of, money and happiness? We all want happiness, we all want money, but how do we think about the relationship between those two?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of these studies. It does seem that Israelis are happier. Happiness is like a little bit of a hard thing to have a super concrete definition for. But I do think the fact that stuff we've been talking about, that people live here with not just their resilience, but their purpose and their sense of meaning, and, strong social connections. We may not have the same type of schools with the same exact, that type of community feel, but at the same time, everyone, you know, not just because it's a small country and people know each other, but there is some connection even within the different kind of sects of Israeli society, different types of, religious and not religious, and within the religious and within the not religious. But people do feel connection. We're in it together. I don't know if I have anything particularly insightful to add to it, but I do see that, people that I work with, they're not saving up to buy themselves, just to constantly upgrade and get nicer cars and nicer clothes. Like, they save with a purpose. They want to be able to help themselves, but help their children, help give tzedakah, give charity to causes that they believe in. And I think people in general, do live with kind of a sense of meaning that does give that happiness. I'm sure if you dig into those studies that always show Israel ranking fairly high, despite its, per capita wealth not being quite as high, certainly as America's or as many other places. But I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. And I do see that in some of my clients as well, I think.
Got it. And then the last Aliyah question for today. We did have a bit of a buzz around the recent episode with Revu Berman, who was a very talented mechanech and made Aliyah, and very quickly realized that he just couldn't make ends meet on a Israeli chinuch salary with Baruch Hashem, a growing family. And so that created some conversations around the question of Aliyah and chinuch. So what have you seen as far as mechanchim who want to make Aliyah, who are very passionate about their chinuch, and sort of how does that work? Is it possible to make that work? Is it, there's maybe, as someone said, it's like this dirty secret that every mechanech, Anglo mechanech in Israel, has significant financial backing from a parent or something like that. Is that true? Is that not true?
Yeah, I do think there's a wide range of what goes on in chinuch here. I think it is true generally from what I've seen. Certainly, kind of, if we're not talking about, administrators or, Rosh Yeshiva, I think, with all of their responsibility, probably do make a little more of a living wage. But kind of a regular chinuch job, it's definitely not a lot of money. And it definitely, if that's someone's only salary and they want to have some of the kind of Anglo lifestyle or live in an Anglo place, it is gonna be tough. And I could totally hear what Rabbi Berman said, that would be very hard. Does everyone have financial backing? No, I don't think that's true. Are there people who, bought their homes long enough ago? Sorry, a long time ago, that when it was still cheap, and that really makes a ginormous difference in their overall budget every month, so that they can live on less income. Yeah, that happens. But people moving today, it could be more complicated. It's hard. I mean, and in Israel also, it's like an important thing that tax rates are not like in America, where you could file, married file jointly. So everyone's independent. So there's a big difference between someone who's in chinuch and both spouses work, which could work fine. Versus even someone who's not a chinuch, maybe a very high paying job, but if it's only one spouse working, they might not even take home enough in that situation. So I'm saying it's not, you can't just look at it in a vacuum of one job. It's, are both spouses working? A lot of people chinuch will have additional jobs either in the summer, when a lot of the yeshivas or seminaries and schools are off, and sometimes that means going back to America to a camp. Sometimes that means working or running camps here. Sometimes it means tutoring. Sometimes it means trying. It's a little harder to find, part-time side jobs that are not necessarily in chinuch. Again, it could be tutoring, which isn't chinuch. It could be that can learn, to give music lessons. And there are people that do different things. It's definitely not of the higher paying jobs here to be in clinic in general. But again, I know several people, they work multiple jobs, sometimes working many part-time jobs, sometimes, that adds up to more than one full-time job. It really depends on a lot of things, and it's case by case. Certainly, like you said, there are some people who come with whatever type of backing. Maybe they inherited money. Maybe they owned a home in America when I think some of the jobs, even in clinics in America, you could make a decent salary in some communities and some institutions there. So everyone has their story, how they do it. But yeah, it's certainly not, if you come in high tech programming or coming with an American job, working for, some big firm in America as a consultant or a lawyer, yeah, those are going to make a lot more. I still wouldn't say it's the only way to do it is with financial backing. It really just depends. It also depends on where you live. There may be places where not far from an American community where if you're able to, not everyone can, that, all these, it's a lot of things that goes into it. I wouldn't tell everyone you can't do it. And I wouldn't say just come and it'll just work out. You got to kind of figure it out case by case.
Right. And I guess just I don't want to dwell on this for too long. We are running low on time, but like if you had to ascribe some sort of percentage to, in what to what level the challenge is about real estate. Just, when I think about it, the fact that all these yeshivas and seminaries are basically in Yerushalayim and then some, Beit Shemesh, Shalom, KBY, but really in a very specific area and a very, very, very expensive area. So like to what extent is that the main culprit of challenge versus other factors that will be true, even if you're willing to, commute from somewhere farther?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, I do think that the most common financial challenge with Aliyah, I think the most common expense really that's challenging is buying a house nowadays. I mean, just look at prices for even simple, not ginormous, not the most prime location, but a family coming with several children that wants to have, three or four bedrooms, that could cost $1 million. It costs well over 3 million shekel in many of these places. So you have to just look at that and see. And by Israeli law, you need to put down a very large percentage, 25% of that. So you have to have that. So that's a big limiting factor. You have to have enough income to cover a mortgage. A mortgage in a case like that, it could be 10, 11, 12,000 shekel a month or more. um, it could be a lot more. And with the tax rates also being fairly high, once you're making enough to cover that size mortgage or other expenses, so it becomes hard. Real estate is definitely part of it. There are programs the government has been trying. There's a program called Mechir Lemishtakein, or there's different things that you could do to have a little bit better conditions or maybe a smaller down payment. And then you could try to get into the real estate market. I don't think it's as common in America to do things like this, but someone will maybe buy a small apartment and not live in it and have it as an investment and rent somewhere else in the meantime. And do that with, if they are Zocha in this Israeli kind of lottery system, that maybe then eventually they'll be able to sell it for a profit and turn that into something else that maybe they'll live in that one, or maybe they'll do it again. In Israeli society, these things are very common, and it's a challenge, but there are, to build and plan for the future if you're really willing to live within your means and limit, a lot of your expenses to try to hit that goal of owning a house. But yes, to the long answer to your short question, real estate is definitely a very big part of it. I mean, cars are also expensive and taxes are a pretty big deal once you're earning enough to afford any of this stuff. But definitely real estate's a huge part of the
Got it.
challenge.
So before we go to the lightning round, one other sort of question about from your professional seat. I'm sure they're not paying you for your time to work on shalom bayis, but I'm sure that money can be a cause of strife between couples. And so, sort of, how do you see that? What's your take? How do you respond when the couple is coming to you for advice, but that they can't really see eye to eye with each other? How do you navigate that? And how do you advise others to think about their financial health along with their marital health?
So, like you said, I try not to play therapist, but a lot of my certainly try not to play couples therapist, but a lot of my work does end up kind of being like money therapy and just helping people learn how to think about money. And that's different for everyone. But specifically, as you mentioned, shalom bias is, there's studies on what couples most fight about. And always one of the top few things is money. But, what I've seen, I have had uncomfortable situations, unfortunately, where spouses don't see eye to eye and we try to bridge the gap. But I think just communication and really finding a system that works. There are some people that I work with that are married that one spouse deals with everything and the other one, very, very, very little, maybe only a major decision or a signature if it's needed, something like that. And there are those that really discuss everything. So everyone has to kind of figure out what works for them. Hopefully, people that are hopefully otherwise happily married are on the same page about what their priorities and goals are. And once they understand, how finances impact, those, what they want to do and what sacrifice they need to make and how they need to prioritize, hopefully it can work together. So I try not to be a couples therapist, but I think it is important that people communicate about it. They both have an understanding, both for a day to day or year to year perspective. And, also it's important, just God forbid, if something happens to one spouse and the other one doesn't know about, their finances, that's also, not good. People need to know and have things written down. There's no doubt about it. It is a challenge out there. It's something people come with different backgrounds. They didn't grow up the same way. They have different attitudes towards saving and spending and earning and responsibilities and expectations. But, with the right communication and hopefully, being on the same page about the big things, then hopefully more of the little things could fit in place.
Okay, so let's go to our lightning round. 3 short questions, 3 short answers. We're in the summer. We have these nice long Shabbos afternoons. What do you like to do at that time?
You're right. It is long. I guess like many others, I try to sleep sometimes. Baruch Hashem, we have 6 children usually home and often a lot of their friends. I can't say I always get to sleep a long time, but between sleeping, sometimes going out to kids, and then, in Beit Shemesh, the shuls have nice learning programs right near our house for kids, either Avos Ubanim or parent-child learning. So try to do some learning on my own, some learning with the kids, some sleeping. It's a lot of time. Hopefully we use it well. Nothing particularly unique for me.
Okay, what's your favorite sefer on the Parsha?
On the Parsha Dafka. Oh, interesting. There's actually a sefer I like a lot called Dushat Pshuto Shel Mikra. It's Rav Cooperman from Michlala, who has a whole long doctoral thesis on Pshuto Shel Mikra, but there's a condensed version that has a very wide variety of different types of ideas and methodologies that he has going through. So that's, if I have to pick out one on the Parsha, that is one that I enjoy. Good sefer.
And if you were forced to choose a new career today, maybe something you've always dreamed of doing as a kid, something you had an itch to try out, what would that be?
Short answer, I don't know. I like where things are now. So I'm not itching to move. I have also liked teaching in the past. If the right opportunity came up, not to change, but to part-time add, I would definitely consider something like that. I don't know. I think once when I was little, I read a biography of a Federal Reserve chairman. I think it was Alan Greenspan then. That sounded like an interesting job, but nowadays I don't think I would want that even for a minute. Yeah, I don't know. I would teach a little more probably, but otherwise, I think I'm good where I am. I hope these are not too boring answers, but that's what I got.
Yeah, it's always good to hear people who are so shalom in their life, and it's a big bracha, and also a testament to your hard work and decisions that you made along the way. So I'm happy for you for that, and thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing all this insight.
Okay, thank you for having me. Continued hatzlacha. Keep up all the good work. Always good to see you. And Bezrat Hashem, we'll be in touch further, and we should have Tuvot.
Amen, amen. Thank you.